Hello lovely people, I'm Catherine and welcome to this week's Comfort of Coverlet. I know I don't normally begin by looking at you and you just see my hands, but I just wanted to say something that's been on my mind really for the last couple of days. You are all amazing. I mean, that's always on my mind, but specifically in the Facebook group there have been a few people who have mentioned that they are struggling with piecing the stars. And the rush of support and encouragement from the rest of you towards those people is just phenomenal. And especially since our theme is friendship, you know, it just, yeah. That being said, I did think last week of offering some alternatives because I know that a lot of you are not comfortable with piecing, you're not patchworkers or quilters, excuse me, and I do think I mentioned in the video that the comfort of working on a background cloth, the comfort, yes I know what I said, is reassuring when you're not used to, you know, taking two tiny bits and sewing them together in mid-air. I thought long and hard about offering alternatives. I offered last year's Friendship Star as an alternative because I think that's slightly less complex to piece. Let's use the word complex, which doesn't necessarily mean difficult. It has less pieces. But I didn't want to offer last week all the things I'm going to suggest to you today because I didn't want you to go straight away to one of those. I wasn't being mean or, you know, trying to, well I guess I was trying to push you a little bit. If you're one of the people that are uncomfortable with piecing and don't have any experience of it, I just wanted you to give it a go basically, and I hoped that by saying wonky and explaining it as best I could and pointing out that mine were super wonky and the wonkier they are the better they look and so on, that it would, you know, encourage those of you that were unsure to give it a go. And I know many of you did. Deb, big thumbs up to you. Deb was really unsure, she gave it a go and she did it. But not everybody, that's not everybody, you know, I'm always saying we're all different. There are things that, you know, some of us do well and others have other, what do they call it, wheelhouses. So this week I will show you some alternatives if you've really struggled or you just don't like it. It might not be that you can't do it, because I believe you all can do it. Absolutely, and I'm not just saying that, but maybe you can't do it to your satisfaction, or maybe you're not happy with the process, you don't like doing it. I mean, that's absolutely fine. This year I'm trying to put a bit of everything in throughout the year, technique-wise, for two reasons. One is those of you who are new to this kind of thing, that's a learning process, isn't it? But the other thing is I think it makes the finished piece look wonderful and eclectic and, you know, all that stuff. Eccentric even. I love eccentric. Biggest compliment someone can pay me is to call me eccentric. So anyway, yeah, witter. It'll be a little bit longer this video because of this introductory wittering, but I was just so moved and touched by how so many of you rushed to the aid and support, and from making suggestions or just saying, oh yes, I felt that as well, you know, you're not alone, you're not the only one that's struggling, or you're not the only one that doesn't like it. And you know, often when we see other people, you know, it feels like everybody's saying, oh, this is lovely and great and aren't they fabulous, and you're thinking, well no, I don't really like it, and you feel a bit out of it. But that sense of community and friendship, yeah, it was just great. It was just great. Thank you so much, all of you. Friendship is, you know, friendship's always important, but yeah, I'm not going to get, you know, but especially in these times, isn't it? Anyway, so all that being said, thank you all. I love you all. You're all amazing. I'm going to primarily this week join my stars together. But before I do that, we'll go down onto my desk. I'm actually sitting at my desk and I've tilted my thing so that I didn't have to get my tripod out and everything to do this bit. And I'll just make a few suggestions. Some are mine and some are from the wonderful people in the Facebook group who have come up with suggestions as well for alternatives if you didn't like piecing the star. Okay, so you'll see my hands in a minute and we'll get onto the desk. Big kisses and hugs to all of you. Okay, the first thing, for those of you who weren't following last year, this is my last year's stitch journal that we did weekly. All the videos are still there if you don't know it and you want to go back and start January 24 and work through with that, you go for it. But anyway, this is the Friendship Star. This is a traditional quilt block made using squares and half square triangles, and I did this in such a way that you sewed 2 squares together and then you cut them apart, and it created these little units. So you had to do 2 lots of sewing 2 squares together, and then the rest was sewing the squares. So it was piecing in mid-air, but there were less little bits, and it's I think less complex to make, like I said. So I linked the video last week, I'll link it again this week, and I'll also put it up at the end. You know, when this video finishes, at the end you see my face popping up, which you can click on to subscribe if you haven't already, and then there's a suggested video, and I'll make this the suggested video so it's easy for you to just click on it and go and watch that again if you want to. So that's the Friendship Star, and then if you make those, then you can proceed in exactly the same way, you know, as I'm going to with my wonky stars that I've done this time around. So that's that. Another alternative is to just get a scrap of paper. This is just scraps of copy paper, and let's just do one so you can see, and just draw a star. And you can either just go for it freehand, sort of like that, and then you can cut that out, and then you can use that as a template. I've done that too big for any of my scraps of cloth. I would suggest, if you're going to do this, to not have these points too long and thin, because that's fine in paper, but if you do that in fabric, that's going to be quite, you know, free. So what you could do, if you've drawn it and you've got that going on, just change the lines to make them shorter and fatter. Do you see what I mean? If you really don't want to draw a star, if you Google star drawing outlines or something like that, you'll find images that you can print out. There's many different ways of doing it. I've done a 5-pointed star there. You can do it with, I hope you can still see what I'm doing. You can do it with a triangle that way, and then another triangle that way. That gives you a different kind of star with 6 points. You could also echo the shape of the one that we made, the one I made last week. So you could draw a centre square, and you can do it freehand, or you can draw around something like that, and then continue the sides out like this, like so, and then make those like a letter M. You can all do a letter M, yeah? And that gives you a similar shape to the wonky star. And you can do these excuse me, all different sizes. Make yourself some templates, and then when you've done that, you can cut it out. Let's cut this one out, since this is the same shape as the one we're making. And I'm not even cutting out on the lines, it really doesn't matter. You can be as accurate or as not as you want to be. And there we go, super wonky. So then now you've got this little template, you can do one of two things. You could either leave it like that, get a piece of cloth, sorry it's green on green, put it on there. You could do it on the wrong side of your piece of cloth with a tiny bit of glue stick to hold it in place while you cut round it. This cloth doesn't really have a wrong side. And then you'll have a tiny bit of glue stick on the back of your cloth, but you know, it should be okay. Or you can do what I normally do, is just take some of my little applique pins and just pin it in place, because it doesn't have to be accurate, it's just a guide. A guiding star, sorry. Like so, I'd put 4 in there and then just cut round it, just vaguely following the lines. I'll just go ahead and do that. Okay, so I've cut round that, and you see I haven't been accurate at all on following the paper, I've just used it as a guideline. So I get the pins out, and there you have a very wonky, put it against this white paper, a very wonky star shape, which you could then get your background fabric, your background cloth. You know, when I get into joining mine together, I'll talk about size and so on again. So just get one single big piece of background cloth. That would be one option. And then just lay them on, all your different stars in. I mean, that obviously doesn't show on there. Very bad choice of cloth, Catherine, but you get the idea. And then you applique those. This is raw edge applique. It's just, but you know, don't be put off by those words. You're just going to stitch that on there. So you can just put some pins, and you can either just do a running stitch around the edge. Don't worry about raw edges in the wash. If you do a running stitch around the edge, it'll fray a bit where it's on the straight. Where it's on the diagonal, it won't fray because it's on the bias. I have raw edge things that go through the wash all the time, and there's no problem if you stitch enough. But if you didn't like that raggedy edge look, you could go around the edge with an overcast stitch or a blanket stitch. You could do that in a contrasting colour, you know, you could really play with that and make that part of the design. So I hope you can visualise with my two rather dingy colours that if you had all different sizes and all different colours of stars, you could even start with draw a big one, cut that out, cut it down a bit smaller, cut a couple more out, cut it down smaller, still cut, you know, so the same template, just keep shrinking it till you've got all the sizes that you want. Okay, so that would be one option. Another option using that same template, this is maybe a bit small, but we'll go for it to make sure I've got the correct scissors, is that you can then cut these M shapes off like that. And then with those, and like I said, you only need one, although if you've got 4 different ones, your points will be wonkier, because if you just use one, all your points will be the same. And then you can use those as templates and cut out different bits of cloth in different colours. And there I would cut them more or less the same size so that they fit together. If I just do a couple to show you, let's do this yellow one because that will show up better. So that's small, I would probably just hold that on there, or even just cut freehand. I'm just, you know, giving you ideas, and then you can go with whatever you're comfortable with to get the shapes. So that's one M shape, so you'd obviously need 4 of those, and you can do 4 different colours. And then a centre square out of this. And then you do you do a centre square and 4 points in all different sizes to give you your variety of stars. Let's do a, no, I think you get the idea. And then you get your background and you stitch those on in the same way. And this is this is kind of applique fabric colour, cloth. I don't know why I keep saying fabric. I've been with a friend who calls it fabric, that's why. Cloth collage. So I'd stitch these down, I'd just stitch that down with a little running stitch around the edge, or you could invisible base them on and then do fancy stitching later. And then those you could butt them up, or you could overlap them. I'd probably overlap them a little bit, maybe by sort of 1/4 of an inch. So you'd have one like that, pretend these are in cloth, one like that, one like that, and one like that. And there you get your wonky star. Your 4 star points will be different colours. If you wanted to go further still, you could of course cut these down into 2 points. You get the idea. And then just stitch them onto the surface, applique. If you didn't like the idea of even these little fiddly bits, you could just get your star template. I'm going to have to get another one now because I've cut that up. Let's go with this one. So I'll just cut this one out. There you go. And again, you can make a few of these in all different sizes. That was the one where I just drew a triangle one way up and then one the other way up. So make yourself a few templates, all different sizes. I would do that with my backing cloth, so I have my 2 layers. I'd get my 2 layers basted together, the right size to fit on my comfort coverlet. And then I would do a running stitch round the edge just off the paper. So I do a little running stitch all the way around the edge, and then I get that off, and then you'd have your star stitched on your surface. And then within that you can do fancy stitching, you know, which I'll talk about in subsequent weeks. So you could literally just stitch your stars onto your cloth. That's another idea. Now, what if you don't like stars? You know, you don't have to have stars. This is about friendship, and it was just that the star represented friendship to me. What you could do as well, a couple of people have said that they have friends who are also either they're sewy, stitchy people, or friends who they've asked for bits of old clothing or whatever from, and they're making each star with cloth from that friend, which I thought was a wonderful idea. So you could do that if, you know, if that was something you, sorry, gardening fingernails, if that was something that you thought your friends could help you with. Otherwise, like I mentioned way back in the beginning, for those of you that don't have family related cloths, if you've got a friend whose favourite colour is yellow, you know, you do a little star for him or her using yellow cloth, and that reminds you of that friend because that's their favourite colour. If you've got a friend who likes whatever flowers these are, I don't think they're actual, well, let's say these are forget-me-nots. That forget-me-nots would be a good flower for a friend. You know, so you can think outside the box, so to speak, come up with bits of cloth that you've got in your scrap basket that remind you of certain friends of yours, and use those bits of cloth, and then you could make any shape you like. The most obvious one that springs to mind is of course a heart shape. So you could get a piece of paper, fold it in half if you wanted it symmetrical, and draw half a heart like that, and then cut it out. I've got both the snippies and the blunties, I'm being careful which I use. And then you could use that as a template in exactly the same way as the stars. So you could either use that to cut out a heart shape from a piece of cloth and applique it on, or you could use it, like I said, like I do my circles most commonly, pin that on and stitch round it, and then do fancy stitching to embellish it further. If you didn't mind that your hearts were symmetrical, you can of course just draw a heart, you know, super wonky heart freehand, as wonky as you like. If you want it something super precise in a certain shape, that's also fine. Google heart drawing or heart outline drawing or something like that, and there'll be things you can print out. If you don't like any of those ideas, then I would encourage you to think about what friendship means to you. And don't think about cloth straight away, just sit and have a little think about what friendship and what your friends mean to you. And, you know, if it's your kind of thing, just write down some words that come into your mind, and then maybe from that it will trigger something, you know, another idea that you can do that I haven't covered. You don't have to do friendship stars. Your comfort coverlet is your comfort coverlet. It is designed to give you comfort, to enjoy the process, and that's the most important thing. So I hope that's given you some ideas, and hopefully also some reassurance. So I'm going to tidy up this big mess that I've made. I don't think, oh yes, I know, there was one more thing. There was one more idea that I really liked. I'm going to do it with this heart. And actually, if I can show you, because if we go back to Valentine's last year, the 14th of February, there it is. I made this because Valentine's for me is about my grannies. There's my two grannies under there. Because this granny was called Valentine, and this granny was born on Valentine's Day. This is my dad's mum and my mum's mum. And we made this heart shape, and we collaged little scraps on, and then did stitching in both directions to hold it all down, and then we cut it out. You could do that onto the surface of your cloth, or you could, if you use very thin cloth and a very thin backing cloth, you could make some little scrappy hearts like that and stitch those on to your background piece. So I'll link this video as well to show you how I did that. But that's basically just cutting out a heart shape, or drawing a heart shape on your background if you want to do it directly, and then just filling in with tiny scraps of cloth. I just use little pins and then stitch, but of course if you don't mind using glue stick in your work, I did invisible baste as well. So that's another idea. There we go. So I'm going to clear all this up. Like I said, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea because I've done a lot of wittering and my mouth is a little bit dry. And then I shall be back with the bits and bobs, and I'll show you my wonky stars, and we'll get them onto a backing cloth, ready to join, well, not join yet, ready to do the fancy stitching, yes. Okay, so here is my coverlet so far. That's kind of what I'm calling the right way up. Here is my March weaving. I want to put my April friendship the opposite side. You can put yours whichever side you want, you know. I'm just doing it my way. One lady in the Facebook group has got her centre square and then she's going around, she's drawn a plan to go around in strips, so it'll be like a huge log cabin. That will mean, of course, that you'll have great long strips when you get nearer the edge, but you know, I thought it was a nice idea. So anyway, I'm going to join mine here. So if I turn it that way up, this is the edge I'm going to be joining it to at the end of the month, not now, this is just for the size. So I've got myself some backing cloth. Now I'm not yet worried about how wide it's going to be. It will depend how many stars you've made. So I would say if you're using old sheet like me, just get a piece that is the length of your side, including your overlaps. Now if you've been cutting your backing off, I know some of you have been trimming it back because you don't like the floppiness and you don't mind doing the joining strippy thing on the back, then obviously you can just make it the same size as your top. But I'm leaving my backing because I just prefer to join it, you know, with an overlap. So I've torn this piece of sheet the same length as the side that I'm going to be attaching it to. I can tell you what that length is, but it's not really relevant. But sometimes you ask. I'll measure with this ruler. It is about 25 inches long, but that's mine. Yours will be different. So this piece is also 25 inches long, but I just measured it against my coverlet and tore it. And width-wise, it's probably about 16 inches, but that might change. Depends how many stars you've made. So now I've got this, I can put my coverlet to one side. I don't need that anymore for now. Now I'm going to cobble my stars together with bits of cloth the same or same-ish, because it's all eco-print. These are actually all iron blankets that I've used a few times, and at one point I just liked them so much that I use them in the cloth. But you know, your backing will be whatever. Because I like the idea of the stars sort of floating in the grey background, so that's why I'm using the same cloth to join them as I used in my backgrounds per star. So I'm going to, I'm going to cobble them together with plain bits of cloth. So I'll show you that, but then I will talk at the end if you don't like this idea, this jigsawing idea of how you can get your stars, if you piece little individual stars like this, onto your background. And that will also apply if you were doing like the Scrappy heart idea, which by the way you could also have done in a star shape, you know, the Valentine's heart for my grannies. Just do a star background instead of a heart, or anything you want, you know. Anyway, get on with it, Catherine. We're already nearly 20 minutes gone and we haven't done anything yet. So I'll show you mine. So some of them you saw last week. So I basically did 9. I did 3 of each of my colours. So I did 3 reds. Very big rattly Caligas man going past. I did 3 purples, and I did some with the self-coloured, with the background middle, and some with the middle the same as the star. That was the tiniest one I did. That is a real minuscule one. And then I did 3 pinks. So I've got 9 in total. So I'm going to just lay them on here and fiddle about with them until I'm happy with the layout. I'm making sure that I leave some room around the edges. This, like I said, I can trim back if it ends up being too wide. So I'm going to work sort of from this bottom edge, and I'm going to come in maybe a couple of inches so that I've got room for some of my background, my backing cloth, sorry, for the overlap when I come to join. And I've got room to put some more of the background cloth, the grey, at the side if I want to. I don't have to. I might not, we'll see. So, but I'm going to start, I don't want to put that in the middle, that feels a bit obvious. I'm going to put that off to one side. And then I'm just going to play with the rest and just fill in around. And I'm not worrying, they don't have to line up anywhere. I am, however, keeping them all parallel to the edges. If you started doing them like this, then you'd have triangle shaped bits to join, and if you're confident that and that's what you want to do, you go for it. But I'm keeping them perpendicular to the edges. Where's my little weeny purple one? He's gone. He's run away. There he is. So this might take some time. I'm going to fiddle about until I'm happy, and then I'll come back and tell you the next thing I'm going to do. Okay, I think I'm happy with the layout. I do think I will end up using this whole width of cloth because they take up a lot of space, and I just need to talk you through this. Now don't worry if this panics you. I'm going to tell you in a bit, if you don't want to do this, a more straightforward way of doing it, so don't panic. I've got them so I've got some straight lines, so if you can, I'm just going to check that you're all in frame. Yes, you are in frame. So I've got my couple of inches on all four sides, more or less. So I've got them laid out, kind of visualizing sections. So I've got these two together forms a section. Now they're obviously different sizes, so I've got this one over to this side. Where's that ruler gone? Maybe that's clearer. And it will become clearer hopefully as I do it. Do you see those two lines are lined up? Now I could put that in the middle if I wanted to, you know, in relation to that one, and then sew a strip down each side of this to make it the same size as that, and then sew another strip to join them together that way. Or I could line it up like that and then just put another piece here to make this the same size as this, but I'm viewing these two as a pair that I want to join together first, however I do that. Okay, so, and then I've got this section here which has got 3 stars in it. So again I've got these and those will all get joined together using other little strips, and then I've got these as another pair that will get joined together, and then I've got these as another pair that will get joined together, and then when I've made those sections, all those sections will be joined. The issue might come if you start doing things like this, where that overlaps that, and then that overlaps that, and you'll have all these L shapes to fill in. So that's why I'm doing it this way. That is perfectly doable and possible, but it's, you know, just a bit more complex. So I would encourage you to sort of lay them out so that you're pleased with the flow of colour and all that, but then look at them as sections. I hope that's clear. So I'll create one section with you, and then I'll go away and do all the others, and then I'll come back and join the sections together. So well, let's do this, which has got 3 stars. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put pins in. I'm going to use my backing cloth as if it was a design wall. So I'm going to put pins in all the other ones so that I don't forget where I had them. Right, so I've got those, everything's pinned down except these that I want to work on. So I'm going to join these two together first. Now obviously this is smaller and this is bigger. So the first thing I'm going to do is make the smaller one the same length as the bigger one. Okay, so I'll pin this one on as well, just so we don't lose it. So I'll pick those up, I'll move this to one side. So I just need to join that to that so that these two edges are the same distance apart. I'll get my piecing cotton and my little stack of bits and bobs. So the first thing I need is a little bit of cloth to make him the same size as him or her. So I need to have either a little bit each side, and you could just sew a strip each side and then cut them down to fit, or I think I'm going to just put a strip one side. So I need a piece of cloth that's the same length as whichever side I'm joining, because my star might not be square. I'm going to go for a piece that's about 1 inch, plus I need a seam allowance, so 1.5 inches wide, but I'm going to do it by eye. I'm just going to tear a strip that's about 1.5 inches wide. If they end up not fitting the width of that bit of backing cloth, I'll just get another bit of backing cloth, or I'll join another bit on. I just want them to make sure that the length is the same size as my coverlet where I'm joining them. That's the only thing really that's important. And even that, you could, you know, come up with something. There's always something you can do. Fear not. So I've got that. I'm just going to stitch that to one side of this using my normal sewing thread. Got a little bit in here, that's probably enough. Now here you might want to pay attention if it worries you, if not, don't, about your star points. These are all well within the bounds, so I'm not going to chop any off. Some of them might, let me just get this back in. I got any here? Yeah, you see here this red, on this red star, that point is very near the edge. If I stitch through there, I'm going to chop the point off. So I will either have to stitch a very scant seam or not worry about the point being chopped off. I think I'm not going to worry about the point being chopped off, but I don't want you panicking about that. So I'm just going to stitch some of this down the side of there, and I'm just going to stitch it the size it is, and then I'm going to trim it later. This star point's quite close to the edge. It doesn't matter really your seam allowance above. Be careful if you're worried about chopping off your star point. But I'm going to go somewhere in the region of 1/4 of an inch, not back stitch, and then just stitch along there. And I'm not doing the locking back stitch or anything because I'm not cutting through the stitching line. I'm just doing a normal little running stitch. Okay, so I've stitched that. Let me take that off because now I've put the blunties away because it clangs on the wooden desk otherwise. I do like it on there because it's a little Singer sewing machine charm. I could put a little dot of acrylic paint or something to distinguish them, but I do like my little charm. Right, anyway, cut that off. So I've stitched that to that. If you followed Wonky Wednesday last year, this is similar to the way we did the log cabins. The only difference is we don't have a backing cloth, but the process and the stitching is the same. So I've stitched that onto there. I've cut it the same width as my star. I flip that up, press it with my thumb. If you want to base that seam down, you go for it. And I'm going to put it, oh, it's grey on grey, isn't it? What I'll do is I'll put that to one side to put stuff on, but I'll show you against the wood, because I think that's easier for you to see. So now those two are, well, that's slightly bigger, but I'm not going to worry about that, I can trim that later. They're now near enough the same size. So now I need to get my cloth back in where they're going. So I had them like that. And now I need to join this to this so that they end up the same length as this. So I'm going to lay them on so that the edges match, and then I'm going to look at that space and I eyeball, but if you want to measure, now I've put the ruler away, just get your ruler, and that is 1.25 inches, the gap, plus a 1/2 inch for 2 seam allowances. So you'd need a strip that's 1.75 inches wide. I will go for 2 inches wide, so you've got a bit of wiggle room. We can trim it back in a bit by that long, which is 3.5. So where's my little strip I just trimmed off? So I've now tidied away. Okay, so I've got this strip which is probably wide enough. So I'm just going to stitch that onto there, decide what I want as the right side. I'm just going to stitch that along that edge. So I'm basically beginning to make a little frame for this little star. And again, if you want to trim it before you stitch, I might trim that fluff off because it's not sturdy enough to hold stitching. If you want to trim it to size first, if you want to trim that more square than I have, maybe I will trim it a bit more square. But I just really aim to show you that you don't need to stress over accuracy unless it makes you happy. Which way up did I have it? Now I might put some pins because it's getting a bit big and floppy. So a pin there and a pin there, and the trick is always cut things a little bit bigger and then trim them back, and that takes away a lot of the worry that things won't fit. If you do it too small, you have two options. You can either take it off and get another bit, or you can just sew another bit onto it. Just make it fit somehow. It's cloth, it's very forgiving, it stretches. We're not working with wood or metal where everything has to be super accurate. So I'll stitch that, and I'll be back when I've done that. Okay, I've stitched that along that side, and I'm going to trim this back to the edge of my little star. Keep that handy. And then I'm doing the same thing I showed you last week with the piecing. It's just so that that bulky seam is pressed towards the single piece of cloth. So if you look on the back, you'll see that all that bulk is now laying nice and flat against that single piece of backing cloth. And like I said, probably if I was just sat doing this on my own with all the time in the world, I would baste all those seams down as well with the invisible baste. So now I've got this little thing with the frame around it, let's get it the right way around, is now the same size as this. Do you see? Do you see? They're as near as makes no difference, the same size. And you can even, if you want to, lay them one on top of the other. If you want to trim them up so the edges are more square, you can do that. I'm using scissors. If you're a rotary cutter person, you can obviously do that as well. If you don't want to bother trimming, don't bother. But it's just so you can see more clearly. So now I've got this, and this is the same size. Okay, so I've decided I want it that way around, so I'm going to stitch this to this, and I have been a bit mean with my strip. So you see that once I stitch this to this, this is going to shrink a bit, and this is going to be slightly too small. But I'm not worried because I've got plenty of space here before my star points come in. If I was worried, I could stitch that to that, and then I could just stitch another bit of background down there. I'll see. I'm just going to stitch it on and then I'm going to see. So I'm going to lay that over the top of there. I'm going to match up the edges of the two star blocks. I'm not going to worry that that's bigger. I can sort that out later. And I'm going to put a knot in my thread and stitch that together. Okay, so I stitch those two together. You see that they're not remotely the same size, but I'm not bothered. Basically we're doing a jigsaw, but we can add pieces in any shape, in any size, sorry, that we like. So it's easier than doing a jigsaw where all the pieces are predetermined sizes. So the same thing again, I'm going to press that seam towards, and obviously if you're an ironer, you go ahead and iron, and press that seam towards the single layer of cloth. And so I'm going to look at that now, and you see it is quite a bit smaller than this. So I think I'm just going to sew another strip on this side rather than shrink my star down anymore, am I? I'm just thinking. No, I don't think I am. I think I'm going to shrink my star a bit. So all I'm going to do is cut this off straight with where it's narrowest. I'm aware I'm cutting through my stitching, but I'm not worried because I'm going to sew across it. So I've now got a straight edge, and I'm going to sew that to this with a little strip in the middle. Is this long enough? Yes. So I'm just going to get this strip and sew it onto there. So now I'm going to trim this end off because I didn't trim it before I started. And I'm going to flip that up with a single piece of cloth on the top so that the seam presses towards it. Turn it back up the way I wanted it. So now this has become one unit that's nearly the same size as this one. So that is the principle. It's basically making the smaller pieces bigger to fit with their neighbours, and then that unit will join to this. And so that's what I mean by jigsawing things together. And the only thing that's somewhat set in stone is that the whole piece needs to end up the length of the side of the coverlet that it's going to join to. So I'm going to sew this to this, and then that will be this section complete. Like I said, I've got plenty of excess background here either side of my star point, so I'm just going to sew this somewhere along the middle, and I'm aware that it's a bit bigger each side, but I'll sort that out in the seam allowance when I come to join the next pieces on. That's why it's called a seam allowance, because it allows you not to be accurate. That's not why it's called a seam allowance. That's why I say it's called a seam allowance. So I'll sew that seam and then I'll be back again. Okay, I've done that. So again, I'm going to press that towards the single layer of cloth. And of course putting an iron on it would be the sensible thing to do. And so those are now more or less the same size, joined together into one unit. So I hope that was clear. Basically, you want to avoid sewing in and out of corners. That's why you have to build it up with little strips. Do you see the similarity to log cabin here and the way we joined the log cabin in February, only we're piecing in mid-air. So I've now got this one unit of 3 stars. So I'm going to go and do exactly that same principle to this pair of stars. So I'll sew a piece down the side of this to make it the same size as that, and then I'll sew another strip along this length and then attach those two together, and then I can either then put a strip top and bottom. I'll come back to that later. First of all, I'm just going to go and join those two together, these two together and these two together, and then I'll come back and show you joining them all to each other. Okay, I've got my 4 units all joined together. If you've been paying attention, you'll see that I've changed the layout of the units. I didn't change the units, but once I pieced them, I wasn't happy with this big one still near the middle. I wanted it off to one side. So now it's become pretty clear to me that I need my backing cloth to be slightly deeper, wider, because I want some plain cloth at either side. So I'm not worried about that for now. All I am worried about, or not worried, but paying attention to, is the length, bearing in mind it has to fit along the length of my comfort cloth. But I would like to not join them straight like that. I'd like to join them more like that. That makes sense. So that it stays, you know, in the feeling of wonky. So if you can visualise now, if I did it like that, I don't know, I'm going to do it as I go along and see that all the white spaces need to be filled in with the background cloth. So it's exactly the same principle as before. So if I say that first I want to join this to this, but I want them staggered like that, so I need to add a piece to the top of this and a piece to the bottom of this. But before I do that, I want to add pieces here and here, because I want the edge to be plain cloth and not the stars. So the first thing I'm going to do is sew a little strip here and a little strip here. If you ask about the width of strips, my answer will be variable, and it will vary for you. The width of the strip is not consistent. Just to make that clear, this little strip here has ended up about 3/4 of an inch wide. This one's maybe 1 3/4 inches. The strips vary in width, so there's no point in me telling you the sizes really. So I'm going to go ahead and sew a little strip along the bottom here and a little strip along the bottom here, and then I'll be back when I've done that. I've just sewn a little strip top and bottom, and I think I want them really staggered, so I want to put quite big bits here and here. And at this stage I'm going to decide on the final width of my piece. The length, like I said, was already predetermined by the side of my coverlet, but the width, I think I'll make it as wide as this bit of sheet that's laying here, and then I'll go and tear myself a bigger bit of sheet that's, you know, allows for the overlap each side, just because that seems to make sense. So I'm going to line that up with the edge of that. This will be different for you. This is just what I'm doing because I've got this bit of sheet here. The width at this point doesn't matter, because then you can just tear your backing to fit. I will have to pay attention when I'm putting in these vertical strips that I leave enough room to add cloth everywhere and a border each side, but I'll come back to that in a bit. So it's exactly the same principle as I did when I was joining the patches together, only now I'm joining these larger units. So the first thing I need is a piece of cloth here, so it needs to be as wide as I want it to be, plus a good 1/4 inch for a seam allowance. I'm going to run out of this cloth, so I think I'm going to start already using a different cloth so that it doesn't all appear in one area, because they are all slightly different. But that's just me, you know, you'll have your own cloth. That end is a more similar colour, slightly thicker sheet. So I'm just going to tear it to the length that I want to stitch it to. Tearing, and then I'm going to stitch it on, and I'm going to trim it later. I'll have that side up. So I'm just going to stitch along there, and by the way, I did go back and invisible based all my seams down because I just wanted to, so I did. You can obviously do whatever you want. I am going to take this seam in a little bit closer to this star point, just so that I have more of my single piece of cloth and less of the background. But you know, you don't need to worry about that really. So I'm really tired. Yesterday I took my friend to a hospital appointment in Bristol, my friend who's got long-term health issues. I talked about it before, about taking her before. And it wasn't anywhere near as long a day as when we went last time. There was an incident on the motorway and we were sat on the motorway for 6 hours, I think, in the end. This was very straightforward traffic-wise, but yeah. It's not a long drive, it's about an hour and a half from her place to Bristol, and then it's about 40 minutes from here to her place, but so that's 3, I suppose that's 4.5 hours driving in a day. That's quite a lot. But yeah, she obviously doesn't want to go on her own, but also she's not very happy driving in the city. So I have said I'd take her and go with her, and you know. But yeah, that's why I'm a bit tired today, I think, and this is all a bit technical, and I really am doing my best to, am I even stitching in the right place? Make sure that you understand what I'm telling you. But what I'm thinking of is first of all sewing a strip down here and then sewing that on. So again, it's that kind of log cabin idea. That's not long enough. Let's get another bit of this. And I want to keep this, excuse me, this joining strip quite narrow because I haven't got a lot of play in my lengths. So I'm going to make that maybe I'll tear it sort of 1 inch, maybe 1.5 inches wide, so it ends up 1 inch wide. So I'll sew that to there. I'm not going to sew it to there yet, I'm just going to sew it to that side and then I'll be back. Okay, so I've sewn that little strip down there. Now I'm going to sew another piece at the top in the same way as I did down here, just making sure that it ends up the same size as this piece, the same height. So I'll maybe use some of this again. I'm just trying to mix in the other cloth because it's slightly different, you know, rather than have it all in one place. Yeah, that would be wide enough. So again, it needs to be this width plus a seam allowance. Do stick with me if this is all really not for you, because when I've done this, I'm going to share with you some alternatives. I'm just going to snip it there and tear it. And there's no reason either why you can't make all your sections the same length and just join them with long strips. I just prefer it to look, you know, jaggedy, whatever the word is. Right, so I'm just going to sew this bit of cloth onto there, which is now way too wide, but I will trim it afterwards. And then I'll be back when I've done that. Okay, I've done that. Sewn that piece up there, basted down the seam, and so now I need to sew this to this. Now by pure chance and bad planning, or no planning, I've got 2 seam allowances, 2 seams nearly meeting. But I'm not going to worry about that. In an ideal world I would have preferred that they didn't, but you know, doesn't matter. I can always applique something over it if it bothers me. I just find it visually more interesting if things are not, you know, one long continuous line, whether that be around the edges or the joining. Okay, you can tell I'm tired. I've just lost a whole section of video. I sat down and edited and there's a whole lumps missing, so I don't know what I did. Anyway, I've edited it as best I can. I think it's all clear. I'm up to this stage. I'm going to insert now the alternatives to joining like this, so you can watch that, and then I'll be back after you've seen that. Okay, you're going to see this later in the video once I've already joined everything together, but I'm filming it now by the magic of video because I need them to be separate to show you. So if all this piecing things together completely freaked you out or you don't like the sound of doing it, you can lay all your stars onto your backing cloth, your bit of old sheet or whatever you're using, lay them all out how you want them and pin them down into place. and then you can join them in situ with the backing cloth. So then you can get yourself a strip of cloth. So say I wanted to fill this gap here between this and this. So then you can get yourself a strip of cloth that's that width plus 1/2 inch bigger for some overlap, and you can just lay it on, raw edge, pin it in place, and then just stitch it down. And then you'll get these little fluffy raw edge frames around all your stars. So I'd lay a piece on there, stitch it down, and I'd lay another piece over there, just making sure there's an overlap, and you know, you can overlap as much as you like, and you know, maybe try not to cover your star points. Lay that on, stitch it down. There I could go all the way along there if I wanted to, I could stop here, but you're just laying bits on to fill in the background and stitching them down. If you didn't like raw edge, you could do exactly the same principle, but cut your strips 1 inch wider. So if you wanted 1 inch here, you cut a 2-inch strip, and then you can turn under the edges, maybe press them with an iron, and then stitch them down over the raw edges of your star blocks. With it, that's not wide enough, but you get the idea, but on both sides. Okay, so then it will look like you've done this piecing, but you haven't. Aha. So that's another way of doing it if you're happier doing it like that. And a final way of doing it would be to get your backing cloth and a piece of background fabric cloth. Get a piece that's big enough. Let me just take these 2 off. Imagine I've got them all off. And then get your piece of background cloth the same size as your backing cloth, or slightly smaller, you know, for that overlap for the joining. Pin those together. I would then invisible baste those 2 together so you've got a complete layer, and that would be then what I would use for appliquing on any of the options I showed you at the beginning. But then you can take your star blocks, if you've pieced them like this, or if you've done the friendship stars or any other kind of pieced unit, and then you can turn the edges under all the way around, and I would put pins in, and then I would probably then invisible baste as well so I could get the pins away. But for now I'll just do pins because I don't want to do it this way, I'm just showing you. And then once you've done that, I'm just going to do one side just to show you, and then you imagine the other side are all turned under and invisible basted down so you've got no raw edges, and then you can just play with them on the surface of your cloth however you want. You can put them on the wonk, straight on, however. Just lay them all out how you want them, and then once you're happy you can just go around with a little whip stitch and applique them on. So that would be another option. So I hope that gives you enough options. Okay, so I hope that was useful for those of you that don't want to do all this malarkey. So I'm going to go away now and join the other 2 pieces on in the same way that I did this section, and then when I've done all that and I see how much room I've got left at the ends, I will, stop saying Catherine, I'll sew strips either end just to make it the right width to fit on the side of my coverlet of comfort. And when I've done all that and I've got it all in one piece, I'm going to go and get myself another bit of sheet that's, you know, 1.5 inches wider either side, but the same length. The length is fine. And then I'm going to invisible baste this piece onto my backing sheet in the same way that we did back in January when we did the 9 patch. And then next week I'll be ready to start the fancy stitching and we can all breathe a sigh of relief. I just love the look of it and I wanted to do piecing like I said. So anyway, I hope this or one of the alternatives suits you, and thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to you joining me next time for more cloth tales. Bye bye.